You ever notice how the people who lose everything still try the hardest to look okay? The rain came down in silver sheets against the glass towers of downtown Chicago, turning the sidewalks into mirrors of blurred headlights and expensive mistakes. Claire Whitmore stood beneath the glowing canopy of the Hawthorne residences, with one hand wrapped around the handle of a navy suitcase that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her blonde hair, once pinned perfectly for magazine covers and investor meetings, now clung damply to the side of her face. The security guard wouldn't look her in the eye anymore. Neither would the concierge, who used to call her Miss Whitmore with nervous admiration every morning. Funny how fast respect disappeared when your company's stock crashed 48% in a single day. Behind her, the lobby television replayed the same headline again in silent captions. Whitmore Capital under federal investigation. Board removes. CEO. She could still hear the reporters outside half an hour ago. Miss Whitmore, did you mislead investors? Miss Whitmore, are the rumors true? Miss Whitmore, how much money did you lose? The answer was simple. Everything. Her penthouse access had been revoked, her company accounts frozen. Her assistant stopped answering calls around sunset. Even her driver had texted an apology before quitting. The building manager stepped awkwardly beneath the awning, holding a tablet against his chest like a shield. Miss Whitmore, I'm really sorry about this. He sounded sorry in the way people did when they were mostly relieved the disaster wasn't theirs. Claire straightened her spine anyway. Years in boardrooms had taught her how to stand still while bleeding internally. You already said that twice, Daniel. The ownership group wants the unit cleared tonight. I paid 6 months in advance. Your accounts were declined. That landed quietly. Harder than shouting would have. Claire looked past him toward the marble lobby she had once crossed in designer heels, while assistants rushed to keep pace behind her. Now, two strangers near the elevators were pretending not to stare while secretly recording on their phones. Somewhere across the street, thunder rolled low through the city. Daniel lowered his voice. There are reporters circling the block. You should probably leave before they realize you're still here. She almost laughed at that. Leave for where? The thought sat heavy in her chest, colder than the rain soaking through her coat sleeves. Her phone buzzed again. Bank. Transaction. Declined. Hotel reservation. Canceled. She pressed the screen dark before the humiliation could keep talking. Across the lobby entrance, the service elevator opened with a metallic groan. A tall black man stepped out pushing a yellow maintenance cart with slow, tired movements. Late 30s maybe. Broad shoulders beneath a faded gray work jacket. Rainwater glistened across the toes of his work boots. In one hand, he carried a small pink backpack decorated with cartoon stars, probably his daughter's. He glanced toward Claire only briefly before looking away again, not out of judgment, but privacy. Like he understood what it meant to fall apart in public. Most people looked at her now with curiosity, some with satisfaction. This man just looked tired. The building manager cleared his throat. Sir, service entrance is around back tonight. The man nodded politely. Elevator downstairs flooded again? Yeah, figured. His voice was low, steady. He reached to press the elevator button when Claire's suitcase suddenly tipped sideways, one wheel snapping loose against the wet pavement. The suitcase collapsed awkwardly into a puddle. One of the men filming nearby snorted under his breath. Claire froze. For one humiliating second, she simply stared at the broken wheel lying beside her shoe like the final insult from a life unraveling too fast to process. Then the maintenance worker quietly stepped forward, picked up the wheel, and held it out toward her, with rain dripping from his sleeve. Looks like Chicago finally decided it wasn't your night. The corner of Claire's mouth twitched before she could stop it. Not a smile exactly, more like her exhaustion briefly forgetting itself. And for the first time all day, someone spoke to her like she was still human. Claire stared at the wheel in his hand for a second too long. Rain tapped softly against the awning above them, while traffic hissed through puddles on the street below. Somewhere nearby, a siren echoed through downtown Chicago, fading into the storm like background noise in a city too busy to care who was falling apart tonight. The man crouched beside the suitcase without another word and turned the broken wheel carefully in his fingers. Cheap plastic lock, he said quietly. These luxury brands always look stronger than they are. Claire almost smiled again. Almost. That sounds personal. Had a stroller break on me outside a grocery store once, he replied. My daughter still reminds me about it every time she sees duct tape. There was something strange about how calm he sounded, Not fake calm, not customer service calm, real calm. The kind built from years of surviving things without making speeches about them. He snapped the wheel back into place with a soft click and stood again, taller than she realized at first. Broad shoulders, tired eyes, rain clinging to the edge of his beard. His maintenance badge read Elijah Brooks. Claire recognized the look immediately. Working people always carried exhaustion differently than executives did. Executives hid it behind caffeine and polished shoes. Men like Elijah carried it openly in their posture and kept moving anyway. Daniel shifted awkwardly near the lobby doors. "Miss Whitmore, I really need the entrance cleared." Elijah glanced toward him, then toward Claire's soaked suitcase, then at the dark street where reporters still lingered beneath umbrellas across the intersection. He did not ask who she was, he already knew. Everyone in America knew by now. Claire reached for the suitcase handle. "I will figure something out." But the moment she tried pulling it forward, her heel slipped slightly against the wet pavement. Elijah steadied the suitcase before it tipped again. Not her, just the suitcase. Respectful. Careful. That tiny detail hit harder than it should have. Most men in powerful circles touch people like they were claiming ownership. Elijah moved like he had spent his entire life making sure others felt safe around him. "Hotels are full tonight anyway," Daniel muttered. "There is some medical convention at Navy Pier." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Of course there was. Her phone battery flashed red at 2%. Another notification lit the screen before fading. "Unknown number. We should talk before federal investigators contact you again." She locked the phone immediately. Elijah noticed the motion but did not react. Rainwater dripped steadily from the hood of the building behind them. "You got family nearby?" he asked gently. Claire let out a dry laugh before she could stop herself. "Not the kind that answers calls." He nodded once, like he understood more than she said out loud. The silence that followed felt oddly soft. Not uncomfortable, just tired. Then, somewhere above them, thunder cracked across the skyline, hard enough to shake the glass doors behind Daniel. Claire flinched before hiding it quickly. Elijah looked up at the storm clouds rolling between the skyscrapers. "This rain is only getting worse," I noticed. "No," he said quietly. "I mean dangerous worse. Lower Whacker floods fast." Claire looked down the street again. The reporters were still there, one already pointing toward her direction after recognizing her beneath the awning. A camera lifted. Elijah noticed that too. He glanced toward the pink backpack hanging from his maintenance cart, then back at Claire, standing alone beside a collapsing version of her old life. "Me and my daughter got a spare room," he said simply. Claire blinked at him. The city noise seemed to disappear for half a second. "What?" "Nothing fancy," Elijah continued. "Just someplace dry until you figure things out." Daniel looked shocked. So did Claire. "You do not even know me," she said carefully. Elijah shrugged lightly. "I know what exhaustion looks like." Another flash from across the street lit the rain between them. Claire looked toward the cameras, waiting for her next humiliation. Then back at the quiet man holding the handle of her broken suitcase, like it was the most normal thing in the world to help somebody after midnight. For a moment, Claire honestly thought the man had lost his mind. Chicago after midnight was not a city where strangers offered spare rooms to disgraced executives standing in the rain. Especially not executives whose faces had spent the last 48 hours plastered across every business channel in America. Elijah stood there quietly beside his maintenance cart, like he had merely offered directions instead of shelter. No pressure, no performance. Just an offer resting gently between them while thunder rolled over the skyline again. Claire studied him carefully now. People in her world always wanted something. Access, connections, influence, money. Even kindness usually arrived with paperwork attached. But Elijah Brooks looked at her the way decent people looked at damaged things they still believed could be repaired. It unsettled her more than the cameras across the street. "You really do this often?" she asked softly. "Invite complete strangers home?" Elijah adjusted the strap of the pink backpack on his shoulder. "Only the ones standing outside in thunderstorms looking like they forgot how to breathe." The answer slipped through her defenses before she could stop it. A tired laugh escaped her throat. Small, rusted from disuse. Daniel blinked like he had not expected either of them to sound human anymore. Another camera flash sparked from across the street. One of the reporters had definitely recognized her now. Claire instinctively turned her face away. Elijah noticed immediately. He stepped slightly closer to the edge of the awning, not blocking her exactly, but enough that the cameras lost a clean angle. Subtle, protective without making a show of it. Claire swallowed hard. "I cannot pay you right now," she admitted quietly. Saying those words out loud felt like swallowing broken glass. Elijah shrugged. "Good thing I did not ask." The rain intensified, drumming harder against the city sidewalks. Somewhere farther downtown, an ambulance siren wailed through traffic. Chicago kept moving. It always did. Your life could collapse completely, and the trains would still run on schedule tomorrow morning. Elijah reached for the handle of her suitcase again. "My truck is around back," Claire hesitated. Every executive instinct she had screamed not to trust this situation. She had spent 15 years learning how dangerous vulnerability could become in the wrong hands. But another cold gust of rain swept beneath the awning, and her phone finally died completely in her palm. Black screen. Silence. Strange how a dead battery could feel like the official ending of a former life. Elijah waited patiently while she stood there deciding whether dignity mattered more than survival tonight. He did not rush her. That mattered too. Finally, Claire exhaled slowly. "Just for one night," Elijah nodded once. "That is usually how hard weeks start." He pushed the maintenance cart toward the service alley beside the building, while Claire followed with her damaged suitcase rolling unevenly behind her. The alley smelled like rainwater, concrete, and old city steam rising through the grates. Elijah stopped beside an older, dark blue Ford pickup with rust along the wheel wells and a child booster seat visible through the back window. Not polished, not impressive, real. He opened the passenger door carefully after moving a stack of grocery bags from the seat. Claire paused before climbing inside. She had spent years riding in black SUVs with leather interiors and silent drivers in tailored gloves. This truck smelled faintly of cinnamon coffee and laundry detergent. Warm smells, lived-in smells, human smells. Elijah placed her suitcase gently in the truck bed before sliding behind the steering wheel. The engine groaned twice before starting. "Truck has personality," he muttered. Claire leaned back against the worn fabric seat as rain streaked across the windshield in silver rivers. "Does your daughter know you invite strangers home?" Elijah glanced toward the road as he pulled away from the alley. "Nia thinks everybody deserves one bad day without being abandoned." Claire stared quietly out the passenger window. After that, downtown lights blurred softly through the rain, while the city drifted past in glowing reflections. And somewhere between the thunder overhead and the quiet hum of that old truck heater, Claire Whitmore realized this was the first moment all week that nobody had asked her for anything. The farther they drove from downtown, the quieter the city became. Glass towers gave way to brick apartment buildings, washed gold beneath old streetlights. Rain still tapped steadily against the windshield, but softer now, less angry somehow. Claire sat curled slightly into the passenger seat with her coat folded tightly across her lap like armor she had forgotten how to remove. Elijah kept both hands steady on the steering wheel while low jazz hummed quietly through worn speakers that crackled every few seconds. Neither of them talked much. It did not feel necessary. At a red light near West Ridge, Elijah glanced toward the dark phone screen, still resting in Claire's hand. "You should probably charge that once we get inside." Claire looked down at it. "I am enjoying the silence more than I expected." Elijah nodded like that answer made perfect sense. "Silence gets expensive once people think they own access to you." Claire turned slightly toward him after that. Most people around her spoke in polished, motivational phrases or business school sound bites designed to impress rooms full of strangers. Elijah talked like someone who had learned things the difficult way and saw no reason to decorate them. 10 minutes later, the truck rolled into a modest apartment complex, tucked beside a small laundromat and a 24-hour diner glowing neon blue through the rain. Nothing looked impressive, but every window carried warm yellow light behind curtains and half-drawn blinds. Real life lived here. Elijah parked beneath a flickering street lamp and killed the engine. "Third floor," he said. "Elevator stopped working last winter." Claire stared upward at the old brick building. She had spent years inside penthouses where private elevators opened directly into marble foyers larger than most apartments. Yet somehow this place felt steadier than any of them ever had. Elijah grabbed her suitcase before she could protest and started toward the stairs. "I can carry my own bag." "I know." He kept walking anyway. The stairwell smelled faintly of old paint, laundry soap, and somebody cooking onions 2 floors down. Halfway upstairs, a little girl's laughter echoed faintly through one of the apartment doors before disappearing again. Claire realized she could not remember the last time she had heard a child laugh inside her own building downtown. By the time they reached apartment 3B, rainwater still glistened along Elijah's shoulders. He unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside first. "Nia?" he called softly. "You awake?" A sleepy voice answered immediately from somewhere deeper inside the apartment. "Daddy?" Claire froze slightly near the doorway. Suddenly, this all felt more real than before. Not charity, not rescue. A child lived here. Elijah flicked on the kitchen light, revealing a small but spotless apartment filled with the quiet evidence of ordinary life. Crayon drawings covered the refrigerator beside school lunch calendars and handwritten grocery lists. Tiny sneakers sat lined neatly beside the couch. A science project involving painted foam planets rested on the kitchen table next to an unfinished math worksheet. The apartment smelled like pancakes and cinnamon. Warm, safe, human. A small girl shuffled sleepily down the hallway wearing oversized purple pajamas and one missing sock. Her curls were flattened on one side from sleep. She blinked twice at Claire standing near the door before looking up at her father. "Who is that?" Elijah set the suitcase gently against the wall. "Her name is Claire. She needs a place to stay for a little while." Nia studied Claire with the serious expression children used when deciding whether adults were trustworthy. Claire suddenly became painfully aware of how exhausted she must look. Smudged mascara, rain-soaked hair, expensive clothes wrinkled from sitting in a truck for 30 minutes trying not to cry. Nia walked closer slowly, clutching a stuffed bear beneath one arm. "Are you sad?" she asked quietly. Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Strange how one honest question from a child could reach places years of media interviews never touched. Finally, she nodded once, very small. Nia looked down at the stuffed bear in her arms, thought about something carefully, then held it out toward Claire. "You can borrow Mr. Buttons tonight," she whispered. "He helps with bad dreams." Claire stared at the tiny worn teddy bear for a second, before carefully taking it into her hands, like something fragile enough to break her open completely. Claire had forgotten what ordinary mornings sounded like. Not silence wrapped in expensive architecture, not automated blinds opening above a skyline, while assistants filled calendars she no longer cared about. This morning came with the soft rattle of pipes in old walls, the hum of a coffee maker struggling to stay alive, and the muffled sound of Elijah singing badly off-key in the kitchen while someone small laughed at him for it. For several seconds, she simply lay still on the pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling with Mr. Buttons tucked awkwardly beneath her arm. The blanket smelled faintly like lavender detergent. Warmth lingered beneath it. Safe warmth. The kind she had not realized she missed until now. Sunlight slipped through the apartment blinds in thin gold stripes across the floor, while snow-colored morning clouds drifted beyond the window. Chicago looked softer from here somehow. Smaller, human-sized. Claire sat up slowly, her body stiff from sleeping in yesterday's clothes. For one disorienting second, she forgot where she was. Then she heard Nia's voice again. "Daddy, the pancakes are shaped weird. That is called abstract art. That is called burnt." Claire closed her eyes briefly, as another laugh echoed through the apartment. Real laughter. Not networking laughter. Not cocktail party performance laughter. Actual joy bouncing carelessly off old apartment walls before 8 in the morning. She followed the smell of coffee toward the kitchen doorway and stopped there quietly. Elijah stood at the stove in gray sweatpants and a faded navy t-shirt, flipping pancakes with one hand while packing Nia's school lunch with the other. Efficient, calm. The apartment carried the rhythm of practice survival. Nia sat cross-legged on a chair coloring planets onto a homework sheet while syrup stained the corner of her mouth. Elijah looked up first. "Morning?" Simple word, no awkwardness attached to it. Claire tightened the borrowed blanket slightly around herself. "I should probably apologize for invading your living room." "You only invaded half of it," he replied. "The couch still survived." Nia grinned immediately. "Daddy sleeps there sometimes when he falls asleep, helping me study spelling words." Elijah pointed a spatula toward her, without looking away from the stove. "Traitor," Claire surprised herself by smiling fully this time. Small, but real. Elijah slid a plate toward the empty seat at the table. Coffee first, world problems second. The mug waiting there was chipped near the handle. Claire noticed that immediately because nobody in her old life kept imperfect things. They replaced them. Here the mug was still useful, so it stayed. Something about that detail pressed quietly against her chest. She wrapped both hands around the coffee and inhaled. Cinnamon, strong roast, comfort. Elijah moved through the kitchen with a tired steadiness she could not stop watching. Packing lunches, checking homework, fixing a loose cabinet hinge between flipping pancakes, not rushed, just constant. The kind of effort nobody applauded because it happened every day. Nia tilted her head while studying Claire carefully. Are you famous? Claire nearly choked on coffee. Elijah hid a smile behind his mug. Why would you ask that? Because she looks like the people on airport billboards. Claire stared down into the dark coffee for a second before answering softly. Not anymore. The room quieted gently after that. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Elijah finally sat across from her with his own plate untouched, while checking the weather on an old phone with a cracked corner. Claire noticed he automatically slid the larger pancake toward Nia, without comment. Small sacrifice. Invisible if you were not paying attention. She had spent years surrounded by men who performed generosity loudly enough for entire boardrooms to admire them. Elijah did it quietly enough that even his daughter barely noticed. Outside the apartment window, a city bus hissed to a stop in the cold morning air. Life moving forward. Claire stared at the little kitchen table, the crooked crayon drawings on the refrigerator, the man fixing cabinet hinges before breakfast, and the child explaining Saturn facts between bites of pancake. And for the first time since her world collapsed, she felt something dangerous begin to return: peace. By the third morning, Claire realized something unsettling. Nobody inside this apartment treated her like a fallen CEO. Elijah did not ask about the investigation. Nia did not care about stock prices. Even the old woman downstairs who waved from the laundromat only smiled and said, "You staying warm up there, honey?" Like warmth itself mattered more than reputation. It confused Claire more than hostility would have. She sat alone at the kitchen table late that afternoon, with Elijah's old laptop open in front of her, searching job listings she was wildly overqualified for and emotionally unprepared to accept. Consultant positions, financial analyst roles, temporary contract work. Every application felt like stepping backward through broken glass. Outside the apartment window, snow drifted lightly across the parking lot, while Chicago traffic groaned somewhere beyond the buildings. Elijah had picked up an extra shift at the hospital after a coworker called out sick. Nia sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, building a cardboard solar system for school, while quietly humming to herself. The apartment heater rattled every few minutes like it might quit at any second, but somehow never did. Claire rubbed tired eyes and stared at another rejection email flashing across the laptop screen. Unfortunately, due to recent public circumstances, she closed it immediately. Nia looked up from her planets. You do not like computers very much. Claire let out a soft breath through her nose. I used to. What changed? Children always ask questions like they deserved honest answers. Claire leaned back slowly in the chair. I forgot how to be a person without work. Nia thought carefully about that while taping Saturn's rings together crookedly. Daddy says jobs are supposed to help people live, not become their whole life. Claire looked toward the hallway where Elijah's work boots sat drying near the door. Something about him lingered in rooms even when he was gone. Presence without noise. She had spent years surrounded by powerful men who entered spaces demanding attention. Elijah somehow made spaces feel calmer simply by existing inside them. Around 7 that evening, the apartment lights flickered once. Then again, the heater groaned loudly before shutting off completely. Silence settled over the room. Nia sighed dramatically. The building hates winter. Claire stood instinctively. Should we call someone? Daddy usually fixes it. Nia wrapped herself deeper into a blanket fort on the floor without concern. He fixes everything eventually. Claire stared at the dark heater vent. Funny how easily children believed in the people who loved them. 30 minutes later, the apartment door opened and Elijah stepped inside, carrying snow across his boots, along with the sharp, cold smell of winter air. He looked exhausted down to the bone, dark circles beneath his eyes, hospital badge still hanging from his jacket zipper. But the moment he noticed the silent heater, he only sighed softly and crouched beside it without complaint. Old building, he muttered. Heat quits every time temperatures drop below 20. Claire watched him remove the front panel carefully, with a screwdriver pulled from his coat pocket. You carry tools to dinner now? Single-parent survival kit. He smiled faintly without looking up. Snacks, flashlight, screwdriver, emergency crayons. Nia raised a hand proudly from the blanket fort. And gum. Very important, Elijah agreed. Claire stood there quietly while he worked beneath the weak kitchen light, steady hands moving through wires and dusty vents with practiced patience. No frustration, no performance. Just responsibility handled quietly because someone needed warmth tonight. 10 minutes later, the heater coughed back to life with a low, metallic hum. Warm air slowly drifted through the apartment again. Nia cheered from the floor like he had repaired the entire universe. Elijah leaned back against the wall afterward, rubbing tired fingers across his forehead. Claire studied him for a long moment before speaking softly. When do you rest? Elijah glanced toward Nia, smiling inside her blanket fort, then toward the little apartment warming slowly around them again. This is rest, he said quietly. And somehow, for the first time in years, Claire finally understood what he meant. The trouble started quietly. That was the thing about humiliation. It rarely knocked before entering. Claire was folding the blanket from the pull-out couch early Saturday morning when Nia wandered into the living room holding Elijah's phone with both hands. Daddy forgot this again, she announced dramatically. Elijah was already downstairs helping Mrs. Alvarez carry groceries because apparently the man could not walk past struggling people without assisting them first. Claire smiled faintly and reached for the phone just as the screen lit up with a news notification. She froze immediately. A blurry photo filled the screen beneath the headline. Fallon's CEO spotted living in Southside apartment with mystery man. Claire's stomach dropped so fast she physically felt it. The picture showed her stepping out of Elijah's truck 3 nights earlier, with her suitcase while he carried groceries beside her. Rain streaked across the image. The comments beneath it were worse. Gold digger, publicity stunt, midlife breakdown. One comment simply read, billionaires always cosplay poverty until things recover. Claire slowly lowered the phone. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, colder. Like shame itself had entered through the walls overnight. Nia noticed her expression immediately. What happened? Claire forced her face still. Nothing important, but children knew sadness faster than adults did. Nia tilted her head suspiciously just as the apartment door opened again. Elijah stepped inside carrying grocery bags and a gallon of milk balanced against his shoulder. Snowflakes clung to his jacket collar. Miss Alvarez says thank you for existing, he said while kicking the door shut behind him. Then he saw Claire's face. The humor disappeared gently from his eyes. What happened? Claire handed him the phone silently. Elijah read the headline once, then the comments. His jaw tightened very slightly before he locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the counter. No dramatic reaction. Somehow that steadiness hurt more. I am sorry, Claire whispered. You should not be dragged into this. Elijah unpacked groceries slowly before answering. Too late for that now. People will talk. People always talk. He placed pancake mix into the cabinet. Especially when they are bored. Claire stared at him in disbelief. Your daughter could see those headlines. My daughter knows what kindness looks like. His tone stayed calm. Certain. That certainty almost broke her apart. A hard knock suddenly rattled the apartment door before either of them could say anything else. 3 sharp knocks. Impatient. Elijah frowned slightly and opened the door halfway. A man in an expensive camel coat stood outside holding a phone in one hand and irritation in the other. Mid-50s maybe, silver watch, perfect haircut. The type of man Claire had spent entire galas pretending not to despise. Richard Mercer. Former board member. One of the men who voted her out publicly while privately protecting his own position. His eyes landed on Claire instantly. So the rumors are true. The apartment air changed immediately. Heavy. Richard glanced around the small living room with open disbelief. This is where you disappeared to? Claire folded her arms tightly. What do you want, Richard? Damage control. His gaze shifted briefly toward Elijah, standing quietly beside the kitchen counter. And apparently an explanation. Elijah did not react. Richard gave a dry laugh under his breath. You are hiding with a maintenance worker now? Jesus, Claire. Nia looked up from the floor instantly at the tone in his voice. Claire noticed that too. Leave, she said sharply. Richard ignored her completely. Do you have any idea what this looks like online? Investors are already turning you into a meme. Elijah finally spoke then, calm, low. Sir. Richard glanced toward him impatiently. Elijah stepped slightly forward, not aggressive, just steady enough to shift the room around him. You are upsetting my kid. Silence followed. Richard blinked once like nobody had spoken to him that way in years. Elijah held the apartment door open wider. So, whatever business you got with Claire can wait until outside. No raised voice. No anger. Just boundaries spoken quietly enough that everybody listened anyway. Richard stared at him another second before scoffing softly and stepping backward into the hallway. Claire looked at Elijah after the door shut again. Really looked at him. And for the first time since her world collapsed, she realized something terrifying. This man had more dignity in a two-bedroom apartment than most executives carried inside entire skyscrapers. The apartment stayed quiet long after Richard left. Not peaceful quiet, fragile quiet. The kind that settles over people trying not to think too loudly. Snow drifted slowly outside the kitchen window, while somewhere down the hall, an old neighbor vacuumed her apartment with too much enthusiasm for a Saturday morning. Elijah stood at the sink, rinsing pancake batter from a bowl, like nothing unusual had happened. Claire watched him from the kitchen table, with Mr. Button sitting awkwardly beside her coffee mug. You should not have had to deal with that, she said finally. Elijah dried his hands on a dish towel. I have dealt with worse than rich men with opinions. You know what I mean. Yeah. He leaned lightly against the counter afterward, tired eyes resting on her for a second. I still meant what I said. Claire looked down at the coffee in her hands. Heat curled upward softly between her fingers. Richard was not wrong about one thing. Elijah waited quietly. People are going to keep talking. People talked before you got here too. Not about you. Elijah shrugged slightly. I work maintenance at a hospital, Claire. Last month, somebody blamed me because the vending machine ate their dollar. She almost laughed despite herself. Almost. Then her face softened again. This could hurt you. Maybe. And your daughter? At that, Elijah glanced toward Nia's bedroom, where music played softly behind the closed door while she worked on her science project. His expression changed gently. Softer, somehow. My daughter knows the difference between gossip and character. Claire stared at him for a long moment after that. Men in her old world defended people strategically, carefully. Every action measured against optics and reputation. Elijah defended people instinctively, like dignity itself mattered more than convenience. The thought unsettled her in ways she could not explain. Her eyes drifted toward the dead laptop still sitting open on the kitchen table. Another rejection email glowed dimly on the screen. Elijah noticed immediately. Bad one? Claire exhaled through her nose. Apparently, financial scandals make companies nervous during hiring interviews. Funny. What? Hospital hired a surgeon last year who got arrested for tax fraud. Claire blinked once. That is not encouraging. He was still good with hearts. The corner of her mouth twitched before she could stop it. Elijah noticed but politely pretended not to. Another silence settled between them afterward, comfortable this time. Outside, wind rattled softly against the apartment windows, while the heater hummed steadily in the background. Claire realized she had started measuring safety through sounds now. The heater running, Nia laughing. Elijah moving quietly through the kitchen at midnight, fixing something nobody else noticed was broken. Small sounds, human sounds. Why did you help me? She asked suddenly. Elijah looked genuinely confused by the question. You needed help. Most people saw headlines. Most people do not know you. Claire stared down at her coffee again. You do not know me either. I know enough. Enough for what? Elijah crossed the kitchen slowly and reached past her toward the cabinet above the table. His sleeve brushed lightly against her shoulder for half a second. Warm, careful, human. He grabbed a box of tea bags before answering quietly. Enough to know somebody should not lose their whole life alone. The sentence landed somewhere deep inside her chest and stayed there. Claire looked away quickly before emotion could fully reach her face. Years of boardrooms had taught her how to survive humiliation publicly. But kindness? Kindness was harder. Kindness slipped beneath armor before you realized you were vulnerable. Nia suddenly burst from the hallway, holding her cardboard solar system triumphantly above her head. Daddy! Jupiter fell off again. Elijah immediately crouched beside her project without hesitation. That is because Jupiter enjoys drama. No, Nia corrected seriously. That is because glue is weak. Claire watched them kneeling together on the living room floor, beneath warm apartment light, while snow drifted quietly outside the windows. Elijah carefully retaped the cardboard planet, while Nia explained space facts with the confidence of a tiny scientist. Neither of them noticed Claire watching, or maybe they did and simply let her have the moment. And somewhere between the crooked planets, the rattling heater, and the quiet man repairing small disasters without complaint, Claire Whitmore felt something dangerous happen inside her again. Hope. 3 weeks passed quietly after that. Not perfect weeks. Not magical ones. Real ones. The kind built from grocery lists taped to refrigerators and late-night heater noises and coffee left warming on the stove because somebody remembered you liked it hot. Claire still applied for jobs every morning from the kitchen table, while Nia got ready for school nearby. Most companies never responded. A few sent carefully worded rejection emails pretending reputation mattered more than talent. Claire stopped taking it personally around the second week. Something about this apartment had begun changing the shape of failure itself. It no longer felt like a public execution, just a season she needed to survive. One snowy Thursday evening, Claire returned from a downtown interview carrying disappointment in her shoulders like extra weight. She stepped into the apartment quietly, expecting darkness. Instead, she found soft jazz playing from Elijah's old speaker, while Nia sat at the kitchen table coloring stars onto construction paper. The apartment smelled like tomato soup and grilled cheese. Elijah stood near the stove, stirring something slowly with one hand, while helping Nia study spelling words with the other. "You are home early," he said without turning around. Claire slipped off her coat carefully. Interview lasted 12 minutes. Elijah nodded once like he already understood the outcome. Soup still survived. Nia looked up brightly. "Daddy burned the first batch, but this one smells normal." "Loyalty is dead in this house," Elijah muttered. Claire smiled despite herself and moved toward the kitchen table. Her eyes landed on a stack of unopened mail sitting beside the salt shaker. One envelope carried the Whitmore Capital logo. Her stomach tightened immediately. Elijah noticed. "Came this afternoon." Claire stared at the envelope for several seconds before picking it up slowly. Her fingers hesitated at the seal. Fear looked different now than it used to. Back then, she feared losing power. Now she feared losing peace. She finally opened it carefully beneath the kitchen light. Inside sat a single-page letter from federal investigators officially clearing her of financial misconduct. Claire read the sentence 3 times before her breathing changed. The board members had hidden losses, Richard Mercer included. The investigation proved she had tried warning them months earlier, before being pushed out publicly to protect the company image. Claire lowered the paper slowly. The apartment suddenly felt very still. Nia tilted her head. "Good news?" Claire looked up, eyes glassy before she could stop them. "I think so." Elijah turned off the stove burner quietly and crossed the kitchen without rushing her. "You okay?" Claire laughed softly through the tears threatening her voice. "I do not actually know." That honesty hung gently between them. Elijah glanced down at the letter before looking back at her. No celebration, no dramatic speech, just quiet understanding. "Then maybe you do not have to figure it out tonight." Claire stared at him. At the tired hospital jacket hanging from his shoulders. At the tiny apartment wrapped in soup smells and jazz music and crooked crayon stars. At the man who had never once asked her to become smaller so he could feel bigger. "I got an offer today," she admitted softly. "Consulting firm in New York." Elijah nodded once. "That is good. It starts Monday." Something flickered quietly across his face before disappearing again. Not disappointment exactly, more like somebody preparing himself for change he already knew was coming. Nia looked between them immediately. "Does that mean Claire is leaving?" Silence settled over the kitchen. Claire looked down at the letter in her hands. 3 weeks ago, she would have accepted the offer before the sentence finished. Bigger salary, better image recovery, return to the life she understood. But now all she could think about was this apartment at 6 in the morning, Elijah making coffee half asleep, Nia explaining science facts over pancakes shaped badly on purpose. Warmth, presence, peace, things money never successfully purchased for her. Claire folded the letter slowly and placed it beside the soup bowls on the table. Then she looked at Elijah with an expression softer than anything he had seen from her before. "If I stayed," she asked quietly, "would your daughter still call this home?" Elijah looked genuinely caught off guard for the first time since she met him. Before he could answer, Nia raised her hand dramatically from the kitchen table. Only if she still eats pancakes with us on Saturdays, Claire laughed then. Full laugh this time. Real enough that tears slipped free beside it anyway. And somewhere inside that tiny apartment, beneath the hum of the heater and the smell of tomato soup and the sound of snow brushing softly against old Chicago windows, a broken woman finally stopped feeling temporary.